So, are we all descended from one woman? The short answer is yes. But it's almost certainly not what you think. The name they gave her doesn't help. They call her Mitochondrial Eve, and that name, Eve, brings up a lot of images. A garden, a single man and a single woman, the first two people on a completely empty planet. That's not the story here. Not at all. The real story is, in some ways, much more complicated. But it's also a lot more interesting. It's a story about genetics, luck, and the immense journey of humanity. To get this right, we have to throw out that image of a lone woman. Mitochondrial Eve was not the first woman. She wasn't the only woman alive at her time. She wasn't even the first modern human woman. And she lived in a world full of people. She had parents, probably siblings. She was part of a tribe, a community of other humans. There were thousands of other men and women living alongside her. Maybe tens of thousands. She was just a normal person living in Africa, probably somewhere between 150,000 and 200,000 years ago. So, if she wasn't the only one, how can we all be descended from her? It seems like a contradiction. The key to understanding this is to think about how ancestry works, not just in general, but through very specific lines. Let's try an analogy. It's not perfect, but it helps. Think about surnames. Imagine a small village 1,000 years ago. Let's say there are 10 families. The Smiths, the Bakers, the Coopers, the Wrights, and so on. In many cultures, the surname is passed down from the father to his children. Now, let's watch what happens over a few generations. Mr. Smith has two sons. They both grow up, get married, and have children. They are both Smiths. The Smith surname continues, and it might even expand. And Mr. Baker has one daughter. She grows up and marries one of the Smith sons. Her children are named Smith. The Baker surname from this line has ended. The Baker family bloodline continues, of course. Their genes are passed on through the daughter. But that specific name Baker is gone. Mr. Cooper has no children at all. His surname ends with him. Mr. Wright has a son, but that son dies in a hunting accident before he has any children. The Wright surname also ends. You can see the pattern. A surname passed down only through the male line is fragile. It can disappear for all sorts of reasons. All it takes is for a man to have no children or to have only daughters. His genetic legacy continues through his daughters, but his name doesn't. Now imagine this process happening not for a few generations, but for hundreds, and then thousands. Over that immense stretch of time, what do you think would happen in our village? Purely by chance, some surnames will die out. Others will flourish for a while and then die out. Eventually, after a very, very long time, you might find something remarkable. You might find that every single person left in the village and all their descendants who moved away now carries the same surname. Let's say it's Smith. Does that mean that Mr. and Mrs. Smith were the first and only people in the village 1,000 years ago? We know there were Bakers and Coopers and Wrights. They all have living descendants. Every person with the Smith surname today has bits of Baker and Cooper and Wright DNA in them from ancestors long ago. But the surname itself, that one specific marker passed down the male line, can be traced back to a single man, the original Mr. Smith. He is, for this village, the surname Adam. Mitochondrial Eve is the exact same idea. But instead of a surname, we're talking about a tiny piece of our genetic code. And instead of being passed down from father to child, it's passed down only from the mother. Let's break down the science a little. It's not as scary as it sounds. Inside almost every cell in your body, you have DNA. You can think of it as a massive instruction book. It has chapters on how to build your eyes, your heart, your brain. It's huge. This is the DNA you get from both your parents. Half from your mom, half from your dad. It gets all mixed and shuffled together with every generation. That's why you have some traits from your mom's side and some from your dad's. But there's another much smaller piece of DNA. It's not in the main part of the cell where that big instruction book is. It's in tiny structures called mitochondria. Mitochondria are like the power plants of your cells. They turn food into energy, and they have their own little circle of DNA, completely separate from the main book. It's a tiny instruction manual just for the power plant. This is called mitochondrial DNA, or mtDNA for short. Here's the crucial part. When a sperm and an egg meet, the sperm travels light. It carries the father's main DNA, but it leaves its mitochondria behind. The egg, on the other hand, is big. It's packed with everything the new embryo needs to get started, including all of its mitochondria. This means you get all of your mitochondrial DNA from your mother. Only your mother. Your father contributes absolutely none of it, so a man inherits his mtDNA from his mother, but he cannot pass it on to his children. A woman inherits her mtDNA from her mother, and she does pass it on to all of her children, both sons and daughters. It's an unbroken line from mother to child, generation after generation. It's just like the surname in our village, but it's a maternal line. Now we can go back to Mitochondrial Eve. She lived in Africa around 170,000 years ago. As we said, she was not alone. There were many other women in her tribe and in other tribes across the landscape. Let's call them Woman A, Woman B, Woman C, and so on. Eve was one of them. Each of these women had her own unique mitochondrial DNA. It was all very similar, but with tiny unique variations. Each woman passed her specific mtDNA line down to her children. Now, let's watch the generations roll by. Woman A has 2 sons. Her genes are passed on. Her legacy continues. But her sons can't pass on her mtDNA, so her specific mtDNA line stops right there. It's a dead end. Woman B has a daughter. Great. Her mtDNA line continues, but a few generations later, one of her female descendants has only sons. Again, that specific line of mtDNA ends. Woman C's line continues for 1,000 years. It's successful, but then a drought hits, and the one woman carrying that line dies before she has a daughter. Another dead end, this process of mtDNA lines dying out by sheer chance happened over and over and over again. For thousands of generations, it's a lottery of survival. A woman's entire genetic heritage might continue through her sons and their children, but her specific maternal thread, her mtDNA, is lost the moment a generation fails to produce a daughter who then has her own daughter. Meanwhile, Eve's line just kept getting lucky. Eve had a daughter. That daughter had a daughter. And that daughter had a daughter, and so on. For thousands and thousands of years, her unbroken maternal line never hit a dead end. Somewhere in every single generation, at least one woman in her direct maternal lineage had a daughter who survived to have her own daughter. Eventually, all the other mtDNA lineages from her time died out. They just fizzled out by random chance, one by one. Until the only one left, the only one that survived in every single living human today was Eve's. So when we say we are all descended from her, it means that if you trace your mtDNA back, and I trace my mtDNA back, and a person in Japan traces their mtDNA back, and a person in the Amazon rainforest traces their mtDNA back, all of our lines will eventually meet at this one woman. She is our most recent common ancestor on a purely maternal line. This does not mean she is our only ancestor from that time. That's the most important point to remember. You have thousands of ancestors from her generation. You have genes from all those other women, the ones whose mtDNA lines died out. You inherited their DNA through their sons and their daughters' sons, and so on. All those people, men and women, from Eve's time are your great-great-great. She's not our only ancestor. She's just the only one from her time from whom we all share this one specific, unbroken maternal inheritance. It's a statistical inevitability, not a miracle. How do scientists even know this? They do it by comparing the mtDNA of people from all over the world. The reason this works is that mtDNA isn't perfectly copied every time. Every so often, a tiny, random, harmless error occurs. A mutation. It's like a tiny typo in the instruction manual. These typos are then passed down the maternal line. Imagine Eve's mtDNA is the original text. She has 2 daughters. In one daughter's line, a few generations later, a small typo appears. Let's call this typo L1. All of her female descendants will now carry that original text, but with typo L1. In the other daughter's line, a different typo appears hundreds of years later. We'll call it typo T2. All of her female descendants will carry the original text with typo T2. Now you have 2 major branches of Eve's family tree, the typo 1 branch and the typo T2 branch. As these branches spread out across the world and continue for thousands more years, they accumulate more and more unique typos. A group that migrates to Asia will develop a different set of typos than a group that migrates to Europe. By looking at the mtDNA of living people, scientists can see these patterns of shared typos. People with very similar mtDNA share a more recent common maternal ancestor. People with very different mtDNA have maternal lines that branched off from each other much longer ago. They work their way backward, they group all the people with similar typos together. And then they group the groups. They keep tracing the branches of the tree back toward the trunk. And when they trace all the branches back as far as they can go, they find the trunk. They find the original sequence from which all the current variations descended. That is Mitochondrial Eve, the root of the human mitochondrial tree. And those mutations, those typos, do something else. They act like a clock. Scientists have a pretty good idea of the average rate at which these mutations occur. So by counting the number of differences, the number of typos between any two mtDNA lineages, they can estimate how long ago they split apart. By counting all the mutations that have accumulated across the whole human species, they can estimate how long it's been since the original ancestor, the trunk of the tree, lived. That's how they get the date of roughly 150,000 to 200,000 years ago. Now you might be asking, if there's a mitochondrial Eve, is there a male equivalent? A Y-chromosomal Adam. Yes, there is, and his story works exactly the same way, just for the male line. The Y chromosome is what makes a male biologically male, and like mtDNA, it has a special way of being inherited. It is passed down directly from father to son, and only from father to son. A woman doesn't have a Y chromosome, so the Y chromosome acts just like a surname. It's a marker that traces an unbroken paternal line. Just like with Eve, Y-chromosomal Adam was not the first or only man. He lived in a world full of other men, but over the long haul of human history, all the other Y-chromosome lineages from his time happened to die out. Maybe a man had no children, or he had only daughters, or his entire line of male descendants eventually ended for some reason. It's the same lottery of survival, and Y-chromosomal Adam's line is the one that won. Every man alive today who has a Y chromosome can trace its lineage back to this one man. Here's the part that really shatters the first couple idea. Mitochondrial Eve and Y-chromosomal Adam did not live at the same time. They weren't a couple, they almost certainly never met. They are separated by tens of thousands of years. Current estimates place Mitochondrial Eve somewhere around 150,000 to 200,000 years ago, but Y-chromosomal Adam is thought to have lived much more recently. Some estimates put him around 100,000 years ago, others a bit earlier. The dates are still debated and refined as we get more data, but a significant gap is always there. How can that be? It's because the rules of the game are different for men and women when it comes to passing on these lineage markers. Historically and prehistorically, a woman's reproductive success was relatively stable. Most women who reached adulthood had children. A man's reproductive success, however, could be much more varied. A few high-status or powerful men might have had many children with multiple partners. Many other men might have had none at all. This winner-take-all effect, even a mild version of it, can cause paternal lineages to get wiped out much faster than maternal ones. It's easier for one Y chromosome line to dominate and for others to disappear. So, the male family tree got pruned more aggressively and more recently. That's why their most recent common ancestor, Adam, lived so much later than the most recent common ancestor for the female line, Eve. What does all this tell us? It gives us an incredible tool for mapping human history. By tracking these genetic markers, these maternal and paternal lines, we can reconstruct the great migrations of our ancestors. The oldest mtDNA lineages, the ones with the most diversity and the deepest roots, are found in Africa. This is one of the strongest pieces of evidence that modern humans originated in Africa. Then we can see specific mutations, specific typos, that define the branches of the family tree that left Africa. We can follow one branch as it moves into the Middle East, another as it populates Asia. We can see later branches splitting off and moving into Europe, or crossing the land bridge into the Americas. These genetic breadcrumbs tell a story of our shared journey. They show that all the superficial differences we see in people around the world are incredibly recent. Underneath it all, we are one very young, very closely related family that started in Africa and spread across the planet. There's one last mind-bending thing to consider. The title of Mitochondrial Eve isn't permanent. It's just a description of the current state of our species. It means the most recent woman from whom all living humans descend on an unbroken maternal line. Imagine if tomorrow a terrible catastrophe wiped out everyone in Europe and Asia. Only people in Africa and the Americas survived. When scientists in the future studied the mtDNA of the survivors, they would find a new, more recent common ancestor. Why? Because some of the major branches of the human mtDNA tree would have been chopped off. The point where the remaining branches meet would be much further up the tree, much closer to the present day. The title of Eve would shift to a different woman who lived much more recently. So Mitochondrial Eve wasn't a preordained person. She was just a regular woman. She didn't know she was special. She was just living her life. It's only from our unique vantage point, looking back through the filter of who happened to survive, that she gets this title. By pure dumb luck, her maternal line never broke. So, yes, we are all descended from one woman. But we are also descended from thousands of other people who lived at her time. She wasn't the mother of humanity in a biblical sense. She was the mother of our mitochondria. She is a single, beautiful thread in the unimaginably complex tapestry of our shared ancestry. She reminds us that our genes are a history book, and that story, a story of survival, chance, and incredible journeys, connects every single one of us. It tells us we came from the same place. We are one family. We just took different paths to get where we are today.